Alright students, we are about to begin our last subunit of Unit 3, Neuroscience, or Biology of Behavior. And in this unit, Unit 3.5, we will discover or explore the methods used in studying the brain. Like, how do we know everything we know up to this point? If we lack certain technological innovations to learn more and more depth about the brain, then how do we know what we know now? Well, that's what we're going to discuss. One of the primary methods, at least one of the original primary methods for studying the brain was accidents, or major brain trauma. Okay, the first major and most scientifically significant accident that really sparked an interest in understanding the brain was an accident that occurred to a man by the name of Phineas Gage. And in 1848, Phineas Gage was a railroad worker and was involved in an accident that damaged the frontal part of his brain, also known as the frontal lobe. Gage's doctor took detailed notes documenting the brain damage and about Gage's behavior and personality changes. Before the accident, Gage was a nice guy. After the accident, he was a highly emotional and impulsive person. Before the accident, he was very sociable, he was very compassionate, he was a very friendly person. All of his friends said that he was a really nice person and that he would run through traffic for you, essentially. But after the accident, he started visiting brothels, he would cuss, he became an impulsive drinker, an impulsive gambler, he would try to pick fights with his friends. It's like he was a completely different person following the accident. Well, why did this happen? Well, it's because a certain region of Phineas Gage's brain was damaged. And let's look at where he was damaged. Get ready, guys. This is going to be graphic. So here we see, I know, I told you guys it's going to be graphic. Here we see a wax statue of Phineas Gage and what it would have looked like when Phineas Gage had the accident. So what happened was there was a long pike that, was launched through his skull, as you can obviously see here. And as you can see from the x-ray, the pike punctured and went all the way through his frontal lobe. Well, if you remember from last unit, why do you think this changed his personality? Why do you think he became more impulsive and he started drinking and he became probably a less moral person? Well, because the frontal lobe is our moral compass in the higher association areas. This is what enables us to tell right from wrong. This is what enables us to act properly in certain social settings. All right, get ready. Here's another picture. All right, so here's the real Phineas Gage. This is the real guy. And yes, he did survive this accident, as you can see in this image. It's amazing that he survived. This astonished doctors and scientists alike, and the fact that his personality completely changed also sparked an interest in how the brain manipulates our personality and our behavior. The fact that he survived also goes to show and emphasize the importance of brain plasticity, or neuroplasticity, as we learned in last unit, where certain regions of the brain will develop new skills and new neural connections for other areas of the brain that have been damaged, and those neural connections were lost. So that's the significance of Phineas Gage. So if you're ever in Boston, you need to swing by Harvard Medical School because his skull is on display. No kidding, you can actually go see his skull to this day. So if you're in Boston, go swing by Harvard and you can see it. The second most prominent method used to originally study the brain were lesions. A lesion is the removal or destruction of part of the brain. A brain lesion is a naturally or experimentally caused destruction of the brain tissue. So a lesion can occur through brain trauma, or a doctor can go in and surgically remove a section of the brain or purposefully damage a section of the brain. All right, we see this in frontal lobotomies, and we'll talk about lobotomies here in a second. But for example, that's how Wernicke's area was discovered. That's how Broca's area was discovered, is they lesioned those specific parts of the brain, and in the patients that they lesioned, they found that they could no longer talk, or that they could no longer comprehend language properly. And yes, that was back in the late early 1900s, before we have all the ethical standards that we have today. So maybe a few of these discoveries might have not happened, who knows? So moving on to the modern era, we now have certain technologies that enable us to view structures of the brain. One of these technologies is the electroencephalograph, also known as the EEG. This is an amplified recording of the waves of electrical activity that sweep across the brain's surface. These waves are measured by electrodes placed on the scalp. So not only does the EEG show the structure of the brain, but more importantly, it shows how the brain can function by showing us brain waves when we are experiencing certain sensory stimulation. Other technologies include the CT scan, also known as the computed tomography exam. This is a series of X-ray photographs taken from different angles and combined by a computer into a composite representation of a slice through the body, also called a CAT scan. It creates a 3D image of brain's structure. Does not show function or activity, it only shows structure. That's important to note. The PET scan, as we see here, is a positron emission tomography scan. It's a visual display of brain activity, so it shows function that detects where a radioactive form of glucose goes while the brain performs a given task. So the PET scan shows function, the CAT scan shows structure. The MRI is a magnetic resonance imaging machine, which is a technique that uses magnetic fields and radio waves to produce computer-generated images that distinguish among different types of soft tissue. Allows us to see structures within the brain, not function. All right, so CAT scan or CT scan shows shows function, PET scan shows function, and MRI shows structure. Or excuse me, the CT scan shows structure, not function. Excuse me. So here we see a CT scan. Here's the image that the CT scan provides for us, and so here we can see an area of the brain that has been lesioned. To me, this looks like the left hemisphere of the frontal lobe, so that would include Broca's area. So I don't know if this person would be able to talk after this lesion. Maybe over a while, brain plasticity might enable him to talk, but it's unlikely. So here's a CT scan. It shows structure. Here's the MRI. MRI scan again shows the function here. Or excuse me, it shows structure. MRI scan shows structure. All right, so here we can see the different structures of the brain. Okay. Here's the PET scan. PET scan shows function. Okay, notice that is much more complex. There's a lot more moving parts because to show the function of the brain, yes, much more rigorous technologies are required. And then last but not least is the fMRI, also known as the functional MRI. So whereas the MRI shows structure, the functional MRI shows function because the scan shows the visual cortex, as you see here, activated at the subject as the subject looks at faces. So this scan will show you in real time areas of the brain that are activated depending on certain sensory information. And that's it. Just memorize what each technology does and whether or not they show structure or function. That's very significant. And don't forget about Phineas Gage. He's also very significant. All right, guys. Talk to you later.